Well, hey, here we are, Raul. This is our first attempt at a podcast here at the Webmethod. It's great to know that I'm not going to be the only one out here, trying to talk about identity and Microsoft. Um, any thoughts that you want to share with the folks who are going to be listening in to us?
Well, actually, I feel the same way, right? It's my first podcast doing this live. And, I'm also anxious to see how everybody will take the information that we're providing or even provide comments or feedback on how we can improve, right? Excited to talk about the technologies that are going on right now, the innovation, and even emerging technologies that are happening in our industry and our economy today, right?
No, between identity, Microsoft, IBM, AI, this is something we could talk about potentially for hours, right? And I think that when we kind of came in today, one of the things we decided on is that we were going to kind of focus in on the AI conversation, specifically around Microsoft. There's a lot of components to that. There's not just the AI, right? There's the data that you need to build. There's the governance that you need to look through. There's all of these different pieces. Is there anything that kind of sticks out to you in terms of, oh, this is probably the most, like if people are talking about like one thing that they want to take away from today, what do you think that one thing would be?
I'd probably say what's the real difference between AI and machine learning, right? Understanding what AI should be leveraged and used for and its applications in the industry versus what we're just rebranding machine learning as. Right. For me, that's an important topic in terms of understanding how you apply it in security. I have a primarily security background. My focus has been primarily around security, whether it's identity, device, data, infrastructure. How is AI applied today in a way that helps elevate everyone's security posture moving forward?
So Microsoft is new here at the Webmethod, right? It's Microsoft itself is obviously an older company, established company, and has been around and has proven itself. It didn't start out in security, right?
Right.
And progressively, as time has gone on, that has changed. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah. About 10 years ago, I remember when Microsoft entered the security space and they were wanting to rebrand themselves as a security company. A lot of people kind of scoffed at it, right? They were not really a security company. They're a productivity company. They had their productivity tools, Word, Office, communication collaboration tools, Link, Skype, rebranded and stuff like that. And now Teams and Exchange Online, you name it. And then Microsoft made the bid to go forward and become a security innovation company and rebranded themselves. Now they're one of the leaders in most of the security quadrants that you see today that if you follow, whether it's Gartner or Forrester, they're in the leader role.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think we can count that Gartner probably is a pretty good, I believe that most people, including myself, believe Gartner is a pretty neutral territory, right? And that the analysts that are providing information back to the general public, back to the consultancies, back to potential customers at some point, that they can count on that information coming back from Gartner as being a valid reference point. And Microsoft, to your point, is in many of those quadrants. Why do you think that is?
It has to be the investment, right? I can think of a time when Microsoft said, we're going to invest $1 billion a year just in R&D. And that's what they did, right? They invested money to become a top leader in those specific quadrants. And I remember a time where they weren't in any of those. And as an early on partner with Microsoft and working with the product teams, we used to go in and help deploy and provide feedback on the solutions and solutions that whether they were working or not working or what were some of their gaps compared to other solutions that are in the market to help elevate their maturity in that space. And so with that, I think, the CEO, Satya, has made the wise decision of pushing that investment forward and driving the company forward as it becoming a security company where it wasn't before.
I appreciate all that background. And kind of going to bring this back to AI and ML, but this is all super interesting stuff. And I think relevant for history. Somebody who may be queuing in, maybe isn't familiar with Microsoft's background, maybe has questions about how Microsoft fits into this space, but kind of coming back to the AI conversation, there's a number of different, I guess we'll call them practices or potentially products that exist within the Microsoft landscape. And the first one that kind of comes to the top of mind is Sentinel. How do you see Microsoft's future involving Sentinel and AI and ML or in any variation?
Oh man. So Microsoft has for a long time used, machine learning as part of their automated and I would say tooling in terms of supporting and growing their tool sets, right? machine learning has been the backbone in terms of making what I would say automated decisions, right, for SOC analysts, engineers, security analysts to help decide what to go hone in on and help remediate potential threats. I would say with the introduction of Sentinel, I want to say back in 2019, that was Microsoft's step into orchestration beyond just their tool sets that they were already rolling out. Right. So for a long time, Microsoft has already worked on some sort of machine learning modeling that helps address that, and now coupling that with Copilot is going to help address a lot of those concerns in terms of how do I target the real threat and not have to go through tons of data to understand where I'm going to go either proactively or reactively look for a potential threat and remediate it. That helps reduce the mean time to detection and mean time to remediation. 30 days ago, we were at Black Hat. The theme for Black Hat was AI.
Yeah.
Right? You know that. Yeah. I think everybody that's been there that knows that. It was AI. And what we saw there is that 80% of the solutions that were being created, whether it's a boutique software company, a company that's been there a while, has been primarily focused on XDR. Microsoft has been doing that now for the past 6 years in terms of modeling XDR for their solution integration platform and introducing Copilot as part of what these solutions are doing now. Summarization, creating prompt responses that you can ask in general language, and then providing a summary of it and a plan of attack for users or SOC analysts to go and to take the plan of attack and go remediate.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment? Okay, I want to kind of dive into this SOC. Something that we've heard from many of our customers is they're saying, oh my gosh, we're buried, right? From a SOC perspective, we've got hundreds of tickets that have been opened by our solution as being met a certain threshold or criteria that need to be investigated.
Right.
And as we're tying AI back into the conversation, and specifically into that of Sentinel and other tools that exist in the space, do you see AI forging a path that will help these individuals? Do you see it replacing them? Do you see it augmenting them? What role do you see?
I do see it augmenting in terms of helping the human versus replacing the human.
Okay.
Artificial intelligence is meant to mimic human behavior. Mimic is a key word for me.
Yeah.
Right? That means it's still going to learn. It has to learn from a person to understand how to be better. I would say long term for the next decade, it's going to be augmenting and supporting the human SOC analyst to help them become more efficient. I think that does reduce how large the team needs to be effective, but that just means that those other people can go grow and learn and focus on other things.
Sure.
Right? But not replacement. There's just at some point it's just not there yet.
So in terms of ML, right? So one of the things that popped to my mind every time I think of ML is there was a meme that was going around years ago that just said if. And essentially if I defined ML and AI in the context that we're talking about today, and I said, hey, look, at the top, if I created an umbrella and compared it to identity, right? So essentially if I said, hey, identity has these pillars: privileged access management, governance, identity management. So I would say those are pillars of identity and that support the identity structure. If I went into AI, right, and said that ML was one of those pillars of AI, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. To me, it makes a lot of sense in terms of providing the structure it needs for AI to be successful, for AI to grow. And, when you think about the different types of language models that are being built, leveraging machine learning, in addition to that, that's, to your point, a pillar for AI. So I would agree with that.
Cool. So coming back into that augmentation mode, if I said, for example, coming back to the SOC, ML can augment a person the same way that AI can. Would you agree with that statement? Or is this really just a rebranding of ML? They're pretty much the same thing anyway.
I would say depending on pitch from a specific solution provider. To me, sometimes AI can be a rebranding of ML.
Yeah.
Like, what are you using AI for? Is it actually AI or is it just machine learning with a rebranding? When you think of AI, being able to have a conversation with some sort of intelligence that helps you solve a problem, that to me is AI, right? If I go in and I say, hey, I'm seeing something weird, help me identify the problem.
Yeah.
It understands that and it does it and says, here's a summary of things that I've caught. Here's some of the things you should go look at.
Yeah.
That to me is AI.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm doing a query, right, based on whatever it is that I'm looking for, that I know to look for, and it provides me a summary based on specific queries that I've asked that are more technical, I think that's machine learning providing data for you that you're just feeding it, right?
Sure.
There's different approaches. Again, AI is leveraging the data, so machine learning is feeding it. But to me, it's just like you're going to take a more natural approach in terms of asking the questions of what you're trying to go do and what key tasks you're trying to go accomplish. Right?
So Microsoft has tons of other products, right? We talked about Sentinel here for just a second. We've talked about SOC. What's another place, another product where AI, potentially even the Copilot solution that Microsoft offers, would augment? What is the next one on that list that you think that's worth talking about?
Oh man, so Microsoft is investing heavily in integrating Copilot. So they have Copilot for Security. Copilot for Security is focused on powering its security solutions. To me, the next one that we would circle back into outside of Sentinel and the XDR, because they kind of live together, is identity.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of the thing I get excited about every day. Why would that be the next thing, on that list? I talked to some guys the other day that have been in the tech industry since like the 1970s, and they are talking to me about RACF, right? And they're saying, hey, you know what? Identity's always been important, right? Now it's just it's just become that it's now been talked about and rebranded at this point. Folks have brought up and said, hey, we've got zero trust now, and we've got AI now. What differentiates identity in this space? What makes AI, identity, and Microsoft, like what brings that together? Why is that next on your list?
To me, it's next on my list because going back to Black Hat, where the theme was AI, 80% of what was presented that we saw was primarily focused on the XDR space.
Yeah.
Which, don't get me wrong, it is a space that is heavily looked at in terms of how do you automate and reduce the amount of work involved to go and reduce the mean time to detect and to remediate to fix, right? But identity in itself was ignored, right? Unless you ask the questions, a lot of them gave us a kind of a look like, oh, I guess we hadn't really thought about that. There's a lot of help that's needed there from an identity standpoint as you move into cloud identity, modern identity,
yeah,
right? And one of the things that I like about what Microsoft has done, outside of what everybody else is doing and providing summarization and responses and stuff like that, is they've in their solution, if you, especially a very non-technical person, you're kind of moving into that realm, and you're wanting to build workflows and understand workflows, and you're still kind of learning about it, you can ask Copilot and say, hey, I need a workflow for XYZ to expire. How do I build it? It'll build the workflow out for you and say, here you go.
Hold on. All right, I'm gonna repeat that back, and I'm gonna use some other tools that I'm familiar with. So I'm super familiar with like SailPoint, Okta, right? Solutions that have been around in the identity space, in the governance space. And so when you say the word workflow, first thing that pops up to my mind is hey, essentially we've got this complex thing, right, that needs to perform actions. And there are actions that are potentially going to be business specific. So I'll give you a generic one, and then maybe we can drill into that a little bit. So everybody who's a business has to have some semblance of onboarding, right? They could have their own names for it, but at the end of the day, you have to have a way to bring a person into, we'll call it the system. And the system can be different things, right? For different businesses. That could be they start in HR, right? So they're brought in through a process where they've been recruited, they've been interviewed, and they've now been entered into an HR system. Many HR systems that exist out in the wild. And then something needs to happen. A trigger needs to occur, and it's going to kick off a process. So back in the day, before automation existed, that was potentially an email, a phone call, and they say, hey, because all of the systems were not interconnected, there was nothing that would establish a way to automatically take this person from HR and put them, say, in Active Directory, put them, say, in Exchange and create an email, put them, say, in, give them rights to Sentinel. Let's say they're a SOC, right? Or, maybe they're an accountant and we need to create rights. And so coming back to what you said, what I heard was I can go to Copilot and I can say, I've got this workflow. I've identified many steps in this case, and we'll make it simpler. I want to connect my HR system X over here to, we'll say, Azure. So you're telling me that Copilot's going to help me do that. So So help me dig. I want to dig into this because I do this in SailPoint. We're talking about 6 to 8 weeks here to implement a really sturdy onboarding process and not even process. I'm going to call it workflow. How is Copilot helping that, and what is it doing?
So, I can't speak to the specifics of how it does do that.
Sure.
My thoughts are it has to know that the application exists. It has to know that whatever we're trying to achieve is capable of doing
Yeah.
before you go and ask the question of how do I get this user who's joined from X and then migrate and then synchronize and then create it in Azure to be able to have access to app B.
Okay, sure.
Right? How do I create that workflow? If it understands all that, it should be able to create the workflow, say, here you go, and then you can create the workflow just simple like that.
That's pretty amazing. So essentially, you got to give it context, right? There are going to be some limitations, right? It's not going to go do it for you. It's not going to create the workflow, but it can help you design this workflow. And that's cool because that's super important. Especially let's just say I'm a mid-level engineer, right? And I go talk to my architect. What happens with every architect on the planet? Inevitably, when you've got 10, senior engineers, potentially who knows how many juniors knocking on your door asking for help, what happens?
You probably get ignored, or they come back to you days or
right?
So I mean, at the end of the day, it helps reduce that learning time, right, for the engineer, the mid-level engineer who's trying to establish these workflow patterns within their organization. Copilot is effectively branded well in that regard, where it's your Copilot. It's funny to say, but it's just like
not the pilot, it's Copilot.
Copilot's like, hey, over here, I think this is how you should do it. And you say, hey, that looks like it works. Let's go try it out. I don't think Microsoft's ready to have the execution button where it goes and does stuff for you.
Okay.
But it's going to give you the tooling and the steps and maybe even the script to say, here you go.
Sure.
But you got to execute it. Right. And I think that's one of the things that I saw that was different from that was a key differentiator for Microsoft in terms of playing in AI is they're also leveraging it in identity. Okay. A lot of solutions I've seen aren't doing that. We saw an interesting workflow engine that I thought was really, really low code, like true low code, no code.
And this was at Black Hat, right?
It was at Black Hat, and it was very, very sexy. I like it. I have to say, as a pro Microsoft person, I really like their engine. But when we asked about the AI, they're like, "Oh, we'll just drop it right here." And I just thought, like, "Well, what's it really doing? What are you feeding it?"
You know what? I remember that conversation, and we said, "Okay, hey, they were using AI as a node, right? Which is good. Like that's a way to use it." And we said, "Hold on, brakes." I remember this conversation now. Why aren't they using AI? Why can't I just go into the tool? Which I would say, hey, you know what? This is kind of what I'm trying to build. Can you drop some nodes in here that seem logical to put in to get me started?
Yes.
Right? And we said, imagine if they did that. And how that, and not that the node wasn't helpful, right? There was definite okay, that's a very reasonable place to use AI. And this actually kicks me back, and it's been enough years now. I think I can share this. We'll keep names out of it though. So I was doing an implementation. So this is my agile days, right? So we're doing an implementation, and one of the VPs or directors, he came up to me point blank and says, "Why am I wasting money on you?" And I was really taken back. I was like, "Whoa, that's," and I said, the first thing that popped in my mind was, I was like, "Well, you're spending money on me because I have the knowledge that you guys don't have." And he smiled and he said, "That's a good answer." And he said, "Now tell me why I can't hire a BA to do this." And I said, "You know what? The person or the company that can solution this, where I can call a BA, any BA in, that understands their process, and they can actually drag and drop things and put them into a system, that system will dominate the market because you will no longer need specialized individuals like myself to do that work." Right. And I will tell you one thing right now, and this is when I was talking with him, whoever comes up with that product, I am 100% going to hitch my wagon to that cart because that will be the technology or the vendor that takes up every space by storm. Do you think that Microsoft is headed in that direction?
I do. So I got excited when you were saying that, and we were talking about this workflow engine that was really live.
Right.
You still kind of had to know where to put things and connect things and move them, but at the end of the day, you didn't really have to know how to code.
Sure.
You could, but you don't need to. But the idea of asking for that help initially wasn't there. Yeah. Right. And that's where I think Microsoft is complementing. It's got AI built into the tool. It's not a node, it's built into the tool where I can ask the tool to create this workflow, and it says, here's how you go build it in Power Apps or whatever, right?
Yeah.
To build the workflow within Microsoft's workflow engine.
So it's working like a human, right? And it's giving me directions on how to do this. So there's a couple of, there's just so much more. How does Entra ID, now they've come in, they being Microsoft, I've had a chance to evaluate the product. Where does it fit in the space? So we've got AI, we've got Entra, and we're speaking about identity. How does that couple together, right? How do you make either some synergies out of it?
Yeah, so I think, I want to say, and don't quote me on this, but I think the messaging with Entra is that it's your access management solution all up. It's going to be identity protection, identity governance, access, and secure access. And in their Entra suite of tools, you have Copilot for Security is natively integrated into Entra Suite. So the moment you can use it, you don't have to use it, right? You also have Microsoft's access solution, new access solution, Secure Service Edge, right? You have Entra Permissions Management for cloud infrastructure access management, right? And then you have identity protection and identity governance and verifiable identities as well, right? As well as SIAM. That's all built into the Entra Suite, right? So Copilot, for what it's worth, is already integrated, but you don't need to use it if you don't want to.
So it's an option.
It's an option because there is an additional spend, right? Microsoft has, now that it's GA, right? You can't just go and kick the tires for fun. Now, when it's GA, it's going to cost money.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
And I don't really know the pricing model. You'd have to go to Microsoft's website and look at that. But I think it's a usage pricing model, which from when you look at the different tools that it integrates with, for me, identity is a low-hanging fruit in terms of allowing yourself to use and adopt Copilot for Security.
Sure.
Right.
So I'm going to go down a level on this. So, adopting the tools is great in terms of identity, but one of the things that kind of rings to me and I've started to see more of, and it's always been the case, right, is the data, right? The data that's going into the system, and that ultimately is going to, while the process is important, the data going in potentially is more important. One of the things that I've seen is that, and I wish I could remember who quoted this, so I can't give the attribution to myself, but I saw it, and I think it might have been at Black Hat. They said, AI is eager to serve. And so what does that mean? Well, if I go into ChatGPT, if I go into Copilot, and I haven't trained it and I haven't set boundaries around it, right? If I just dump all my data into there to train the model, that means that anybody who works for me can go in and they can ask Copilot a question about that data, and it's going to get a response back. That could include HR information that maybe is confidential. That could include potentially financial information that's confidential. How does identity mix with the data platform to stop that? If you don't have your data strategy, can you imagine the exacerbation that's going to happen now? You're like, oh, dude, we're going to adopt AI. We're going to bring it in, and you haven't thought through. There's a company that I've seen, it's called Databricks. And I think that's actually a wonderful name for kind of talking about what we're talking about right now. And I don't think we'll go in depth into what they do. But essentially, if you don't have that data solution, do you think that identity matters more, or is data mattering more? I mean, I know that they all matter. They all matter. So I want to say that this doesn't matter. But if you have to start, which one do you start on? If both are in disarray or maybe immature, where do you begin?
Oh man, that's a tough.
Yeah, there we go.
That Copilot, I would say your traditional Office 365 Copilot reintroduces a age-old problem, and that's exposing. What's the word I'm looking for?
I was going to say I was exposing processes, exposing maybe bad habits potentially that exist within a company.
Over provisioning.
There you go. Yep.
So what it does is it exposes over provisioning, right? Because
man, what a great way to phrase that. No, I mean,
yeah. So if you think about it, it is identity because you're over provisioned. You have access to things you shouldn't have access to or have access to anymore.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that it does is that Copilot, for what it's worth, I like the term you use, eager to serve.
Right.
If you're creating a document and you're telling it this is what you want it to do, the first thing it does is it goes and looks through your organizational data based on your level of access.
Yeah.
And if you're over provisioned, ton of access.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of what's going on when it does that, it brings me back to when Microsoft released Delve. Delve did the same thing. It was an internal search engine, if you will, of documents and stuff like that for Office 365.
Yeah.
And many users who were over provisioned would get access search results that were turning up that they shouldn't have access to.
Oh,
right?
man.
And so you kind of reintroduce this problem and start having this conversation again, an age-old conversation that we've been talking about, which is identity governance.
Yeah.
And reducing, the over-provision access by establishing segregation of duties.
Sure.
Governance around access and stuff like that. That's all important. Moving into data security is just, that to me is more, I would say, it should be a coupling engagement in terms of how you address a problem, because that over-provisioned access is going to apply to the access you have with the data based on its sensitivity and whether or not who should have access to that data. Now, the difference between that in terms of data access governance is understanding where that data lives, how long it should live for, how long it should be retained for, when it needs to be gone, and then also the persistent protection when it leaves your on-premise or your cloud, regardless of where it lives. Yeah. But coupling that with your identity. It lives with an identity.
It has to, right? Yeah. Oh, man. What an interesting problem to solve, right? And what an interesting time that we're living in, that we get to see this, right? So as being a child of the modem, the dial-up era, right? I remember just like sitting there waiting for this thing, and then Yahoo came along, and then Google came along, and it all became about how fast can you serve this data up, right? We've got some customers that are putting the brakes on AI, right? They have stopped implementations. And where they're at and where they're looking at is how do we protect ourselves against the usage of this AI? And I don't think they're going like Terminator 2 here, right? We're not looking at Skynet moment that it's going to take over our systems. But in terms of that eager to serve, and it doesn't know which master it needs to, because it's going to serve them both equally if the right guards are not in place, and potentially even if the right guards are in place. And this becomes another point of vulnerability, and it's all centralized. Yeah. Is there anything else that you feel like maybe that is worth mentioning or going over?
Worth mentioning or going over?
I mean, I know there's a lot, right?
A lot. I mean, when you think about, what's going on out there, I think we kind of touched a little bit on was, what's AI versus machine learning. I think that's still very important in this day and age. When we were looking at topical use cases in terms of what people would brand as AI, ultimately is just machine learning, right? Under the covers. And so the reason I say that is because I think a lot of times solution providers are looking to try and just get to ride the wave of AI, right? I mean, we saw it when zero trust was a coin term. I mean, let's be honest. I can't tell you how many times I saw a product be branded as zero trust ready. I'm like, what do you mean zero trust ready, right? You can't create a product that's zero trust ready. It's a methodology. It's a strategy, right?
Right.
And so I feel like we're kind of going, now AI is a new one, right? Here we are, a new wave, a new brand, something that everybody's excited about, and it's going to be AI ready.
Right.
What
does that mean? Do you really want it to be AI ready? I'm like thinking about like pumping all of these records into your AI system. Do you really want to do that? It was kind of funny. I sort of had like this visual model pop in my head of like having like that separations in terms of, hey, maybe you do pump all your accounting, but only that accounting has ready access to that. I don't know if such a thing exists, or like if that type of architecture, or if you would still bundle it all together so you can have sort of a centralized nervous system. I had a friend of mine, so he's been a consultant for many years, also came from Agile. So obviously we have deep roots going back in the Agile world, but he made a really great comparison about identity. And he said, well, when you go in to do an identity project, it's like open heart surgery. It's painful. You want the person who's there to know what they're doing. And when it goes wrong, it's catastrophic. I've been contemplating, like, if I was going to compare an AI strategy I would say that's like brain surgery, right? Because of how much control that system is going to potentially influence the rest of the organization. Whether you're looking at potentially like HR. So that's one that I've heard many times where AI implementation will be seen. And that it's coming back to IBM, their Watson X solution. I know that that's a huge thing that they have deployed inside of IBM. And that's where they're using it to reduce down HR costs and to speed up HR time to delivery, right? Yeah. And this was another one. So, I mean, this is an important piece for me as a business owner is the ROI, right? Where is the ROI in this conversation? And this is another place that I've seen is in customer service, right? So my beginnings in corporate began with Apple. So that's where I started. I was so excited when they invited me to be part of the Apple ecosystem. My first manager, his name was Billy Sanders, great guy. And in fact, I hope he gets a chance to see this podcast that we're creating because it was always funny. He'd always tell me, he'd say, Robert, someday I'm going to be working for you. And I'm like, oh man, that's an empty platitude if I've ever heard one. And now here we are 10 years later. He actually sent me a text the other day and said, hey, when am I going to come work for you? I was like, dude, you're living out in like the Montana wilderness. You don't ever want to work for anybody ever again. While I was there, one thing that I think every business has a very good handle on is the amount of time and money that they spend in customer service, right? And what I mean by that, and it's all driven by very controlled metrics, amount of average phone handle time, number of clients that you've helped, and what your customer service scores are coming back, right? And essentially most businesses know how much each one of those phone calls cost. They know essentially what it costs at a level 1, level 2, and potentially level 3. And they are trying to reduce those times down as effective and efficiently as possible. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's two things that are going to control that. The process for that agent getting information and then the limitations that may be around the agent themselves. Would you agree with that statement?
I would agree. Very much like yourself. I started in the help desk.
Yeah.
The help desk I worked for was the Navy Marine Corps Intranet as a DoD contractor.
Holy smokes!
And, we had a tier 1 and a tier 2, and I can tell you, at some point I was also doing QA, and at some point, it's just we had our own internal knowledge center, and if you didn't know or if you weren't technical enough, your calls would be long, right? And then sometimes people knew how to search the KC. Sometimes they didn't, right? And that's also a thing like you have to learn how to do because not everything works like Google. If you don't have the proper algorithm, you're sitting there spending a lot of time trying to find an answer.
You tell that customer, hold on, I got you. I'm going to put you on a brief hold, and I'm going to spray and pray that somebody knows what the answer is to this, right? If I can't find it in the knowledge center.
Right. So then when you bring up a good point, right, in terms of ROI discussions and leveraging AI, man, I tell you what, I know a lot of people that would have benefited from having some sort of AI co-pilot solution on their machine and say, hey, this user's having this problem. How can I help them? And it provides me 3 things to go try, and it references the KC article that it pulled from.
Sure.
Man, it would have saved a bunch of time. I tell you what.
Who knows how many jobs it would have saved?
That's an interesting topic. I think about that like 20 years ago now.
Yeah. I mean, so I remember being in college, like first week on the job, and there's always a grace period as you're spinning. But even as a veteran, so now a year in the time at Apple, but there's just so much knowledge. And being able to have somebody, can I call AI somebody? Like, is that like something? Do you think that's crossing now maybe some ethical boundaries by calling it somebody?
It's funny. We've had this conversation. To me, it's not. I feel like as ourselves, nerds, we have a bunch of fantasy background in terms of like comic. And I was telling you the other day when you were bringing this up, about a month ago, it's just like, you know what? Superman is talking to an AI of his father.
Right.
That's
right.
Talking to him, and that's not weird. It's just like we like, oh, he's in the Fortress of Solitude, and he has this AI that's his father. His father's still limited to what he can answer, but there's a lot he can answer for him.
And Superman treats him like his dad. Yeah. Because that's just what he has. That's what he knows. And, and to kind of bring that back, which first off, I love that analogy. I mean, it totally takes, that's right. Like we have seen Hollywood projections of this for legitimately decades. Right? And so you end up in the situation where you are trying to, hey, how can we help our help desk? right? And potentially help our customers as well by either incorporating maybe some generative AI at a level, we'll call it level 0, moment where they're doing some some sort of maybe investigative analysis of the problem, right? Can I just get your information before I hand you off to a live human being? So, assuming that each call that comes in is 5 minutes, right? And I mean, that's kind of making that number up. And each call is now costing me $5. That's the kind of the overall cost for the infrastructure running on the background, plus the person that you're paying, et cetera. If I can reduce that phone call down, we'll just say 10%, right? And then we'll just say for the sake of this conversation, it has a direct line back of 10%. Does that seem like a reasonable assessment to say, hey, like if I can reduce your call time by 10%, and again, in the simple example that we're giving, that it has a direct impact. Most companies, it wouldn't be that. There would be some differential level of the individuals, whether it be onshore or offshore. Do you see that would be enough of a use case to get a company's attention to say, hey, we can reduce your level 1 costs by 10%, and we can show you directly how we're going to do this? Do you think that most companies would jump on that, or do you think there's still enough of, I will call it FUD, around AI that would actually stop them from saying, you know what, even if we could see this reduction, we're still not doing it because there's so many legal challenges and technical concerns around this type of a tool?
I think if if we circle back to what we were talking about earlier, which is governance. If you can add governance to the tool, the AI tool, that's a different discussion.
Right.
In terms of being able to add controls and segmentation and understanding what it's designed to do.
Sure,
why not? I think the conversation years ago was self-service password reset. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, instead of having an agent take these calls, why not empower our people to be able to self-serve themselves to reset their passwords? That reduces the call logs down to 10, like you said, maybe 10, 15%. I have to go look at the metrics. That was enough for people to move in adopting a new tool.
Yep.
So to me, yes, if you can correlate the savings in the data that shows these savings of 10%, it makes the most sense to, provided there's governance in place that doesn't allow the tool to go do whatever it wants.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I mean, I can totally get on board with that. And I think that, from an implementation standpoint, there's just so many things that you can do with AI. I think you could definitely end up in a situation where you could have maybe AI overload, where you're like, oh, it'll solve all my problems, right? I think I've seen enough at this point. No, it's not going to solve, and it's actually going to introduce some additional problem, right? I think one of the things that I have seen best is to identify a use case, focus on that use case, deliver that use case. That's good, just project management.
Right.
And then once it's completed, then move on. I think that there's still a lot to go. There's a lot of things that need to be done. But I think that that's probably, at least from my standpoint, I think that's probably been the one bit of advice is don't get caught up in the hype. Because it's still super new. And I think that it has the ability to do so many things that we haven't even dreamed of yet.
Well, I think a colleague put it simple yesterday we were talking to, that it's experimental.
Yeah.
For the most part, a lot of this is. There'll be maturity in due time in terms of how we use the tools in a way that we can govern and deploy them in a way that doesn't provide them over provisioned access.
I'm going to steal that phrase.
But at the end of the day, we're all very new to what's happening in the use of AI.
Right.
Even though AI has been around for, I think, 2 decades, but the actual use and how we're applying it, the actual applications of AI that are going beyond just where it was before, but to the entire industry, all the different types of industries, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's productivity, whether it's manufacturing, what have you. We're going to have to put some safeguards around it. It's all experimental, and we just got to, at the end of the day, I think creating a governance model around AI is going to help drive adoption in a safe way.
Yeah,
right?
No, I agree with that. And I mean, kind of as we wrap up here, and I mean, this has been some great dialogue and conversation. If anybody has any questions or comments, do you know where they could go to kind of post that if they wanted maybe hear potentially a topic for the next cast that we do?
I'm in favor of webmethod.com, right? Love the website. You can go there, reach out directly. But yeah, absolutely. If you're watching this on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn,
Yep.
post a comment.
Yep.
We'll reach out directly.
Cool. Well, that concludes it.